We're down here in the engineering bay with Tom Scott. He's the engineering guru here on Battleship Texas. He's going to give us the ins and out of what's happening in this engineering space. First, we're going to talk about what's going on here this weekend in the game. It's U.S. Battleship Weekend. That means there's discounts on regular U.S. battleships, as well as some really easy missions to help you get down that line. The week-long missions are going to be pretty simple. All you have to do is accomplish them. You'll get a lot of flags, as well as some Restless Fire camouflages. And this month, we're going to round out Project Valor by offering every previous Project Valor flag. That way you can pick up the ones that you missed out on earlier. Good luck out there, Captains. So Tom, there's a lot of stuff going on in this little space. Some of the stuff I recognize from other ships, like we have an engine revolution indicator, but other stuff like levers and dials I don't understand. What's going on here? This looks super important.
Okay. Well, this is certainly the control room, as it were, for this starboard engine. So basically, they're going to receive a command from the bridge that tells them not just half speed or half the stern or whatever, but they're going to receive orders of a specific number of revolutions, because these engines are directly connected to the prop. You always talk in terms of prop turns, so that directly relates to engine speed. With this, they would see the number of turns that the captain wants them to make, and so they answer back that they're doing it. And then with that, they use the main throttle valve to control the amount of steam going in, and then other controls that are here are to control the lube oil and also cooling water. Because remember, as the steam's coming into this engine at 270 psi, its temperature is over 400 degrees. So there has to be a large amount of cooling that takes place too, just so that things don't bind up. But in addition to that, this is showing basic instrumentation for the engines. So we have a tachometer. We have the number of revolutions, because they always want to keep track of the amount of revolutions total that the engine has turned. This is one of the ways that they track piston ring wear and that kind of thing. Think of it as your odometer on your car, basically. Sure. And so this is primarily for gaining information on the basic operation of the engine itself. We have an interesting plaque here that actually tells them how many knots per RPM range, how long it takes for it to get there. So they're always mindful of how long it takes to accelerate this ship. And then that way they can even report back to the bridge captain, it's going to take me 3 minutes to get to your indicated speed. That's
really impressive. Yeah. I know in our game it is definitely not 1 knot a minute to get to 15 knots.
Oh, absolutely not. Because again, like I had mentioned before, the amount of power is almost logarithmic. And so that actually translates into the higher you try to accelerate to a given speed, the vastly more difficult it is to do so.
I bet so. This is very interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
Over here is actually the lifeblood of the engine itself, because you have pressure gauges for the high pressure, the intermediate pressure, low pressure, what they call valve chest, which are the actual valves. We have main steam, which is indicating the pressure, and up here you can even see that it's showing 290 psi is the maximum pressure for this system. Other than that, we do have lube oil pressure gauges. Over here, they want to know how the ship is steering. So this is basically a rudder turn indicator here. But actually, with this, you can run an amazingly complicated engine.
Absolutely. This is an amazing, complicated engine. Way more difficult than just pressing a gas pedal.
It certainly is.
So Tom, you've been very excited about all this stuff, and I want to hear about it. What do we got going on here?
In a very real sense, this is the heart of the engine, because these are what actuate the valves and control the valves to emit the exact amount of steam required to run the pistons. What we have here is called a reversing shaft that runs the full length of the engine, and basically the engines ran either in forward or in reverse, and they do each equally well. This actual speed is controlled by the main throttle valve. But in order to do that, the shaft, when it moves, it rotates this arm, which then moves over to what's called a crosshead shoe, and it basically moves either one of the eccentric rods directly underneath, or by moving it the other way, the other. and actually, but depending upon which rod is underneath it and actually supplying the force to the piston, that makes the engine run forward or reverse.
That sounds super complex.
It is.
That's not just as easy as putting your car in reverse.
No, absolutely not. In fact, the mathematics that go behind the design are absolutely stunning, and it was done by slide rules and pencils.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
This is a great piece of machinery.
Thank you.
Give me the fast five on this engineering space.
Well, we're standing right now in the starboard engine room of Battleship Texas. What makes it especially unique is that the ship was powered by two very large steam reciprocating engines. They did not use turbines like were used on later designs or even prior designs. At the time that this ship was designed, it was actually decided by the Navy that turbines were not economical enough and not reliable enough, and so they went back to the reciprocating design for this class. It was also recognized, though, that turbines design was moving along rapidly and that this would prove to not be the case within even the following 4 or 5 years. So this makes Texas very unique, and that she not only has reciprocating steam engines, but they are now the largest surviving marine steam engines found anywhere in the world.
That's really interesting. So you say reciprocating engines. That sounds a lot like the engine in my car. Is that sort of how this works?
The basic principle is the same, except that it's not internal combustion where you're igniting gasoline to provide compression. Instead, these use 290-pound steam that were valved into the engines, so it could actually be called an external compression engine. And another thing that makes it very different from a combustion engine is that the steam was applied both on the downstroke of the pistons, but also on the upstroke. There were very critical reasons for this from an efficiency standpoint, because the weight of the pistons and the valves being moved were weighed tons. If you did not apply steam in both directions, then you were wasting a lot of engine power just simply to move these masses back in the other direction. So by applying steam in both directions, you're actually utilizing it more, and each piston is basically supporting its own weight. These are called triple expansion engines. So we actually start with a small 39-inch high-pressure piston. It then exhausts into an intermediate piston that's about 63 inches in diameter, and then finally 2 low-pressure pistons that are 83 inches in diameter each. And so the point of this is you need to expand that steam in stages. If you don't, it just doesn't work. For one thing, you'd have to have like one giant piston that wouldn't even fit in the ship.
Sure.
But also, steam does nasty things. If you expand it too rapidly, it tends to turn into water, and now you're pumping fluids instead of steam.
Yeah, that doesn't sound good at all.
No, it's not.
So you're telling me there are only 4 cylinders in this massive battleship?
4 cylinders per engine, yes.
Wow.
We do have 2 engines.
Okay, wow. So when you're using these massive 83-inch cylinders, pumping steam through them, how much water, steam, fuel does it take to do that?
Well, that, of course, is determined largely by the boilers. In this case, the boilers that are currently on the ship are oil-fired boilers that were installed in 1925, 1926 during a modernization. But to give you an idea of just the kind of power that it takes, and this is really true of any what's called a displacement hull ship, the amount of power required to speed it up is almost logarithmic. So while we could easily run both engines on a single boiler at 3 or 4 knots, we'd then have to kick in 4 boilers if we're going to go 12 or 14 knots, and then it's going to take all 6 to get the full horsepower, which is about total horsepower between the 2 engines is 28,400 horsepower.
And that'll put you at how many knots?
20 knots.
Wow.
The ship was originally designed for 21 knots, but it slowed down when they modernized the ship, because when they added the torpedo blisters to the sides of the ship, it increased the width of the ship but not the length, and that really is detrimental to the ship's speed.
Hydrodynamics at work, right?
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly.
So we have tons of different piping and tubes and valves all over down here. I can imagine these are all filled with steam, and it's a hot day here in Texas, and it's pretty uncomfortable. How bad is it for the actual people working down here?
Well, there's actually some very good data on that was made during the builders trials in late 1913 that would still hold true even through World War II, because the engines and engine rooms were not really significantly altered throughout its career. During the high-speed trials, the temperatures in here, it was in the low 70s outside, and the temperatures in the rooms got up to about 105 degrees.
Wow.
So just drink plenty of water and you're good. Just keep sweating.
Just keep sweating. Wow.
Yeah.
What was the average workday like for a shipmate down here?
Well, the average workday, they'd typically run 3 shifts, but frequently, depending upon the workload, as it were, whether they were in combat conditions or just cruising under, in peacetime conditions, they would shorten the shifts, and actually somebody might do 2 shifts, like 2 6-hour shifts per 24-hour period, and that way they can cycle them in and out without just simply wearing them out. There was a tremendous amount of work to be done in here. To a large degree, with a turbine, you simply make sure that it's getting lube oil and coolant water, and you open the valves and you go to town. With reciprocating engines, there were a very large number of things that had to be done to keep it operating properly, and also certainly to make sure that it's in adjustment and doesn't get damaged. That was probably one of the downsides to it, but overall, again, when the ship was originally designed and built, reciprocating engines at that time were the most efficient at lower speeds, were more efficient than turbines, and then also they consumed less fuel at low speeds than the turbines built during that time.
So we've got all this power that's being used, and there's this giant case right over here. Mm-hmm. It looks a lot like a transmission. Is that what that is?
Well, to a degree it is, yeah. Its primary function, actually its only function, is to take and transmit rotational power that goes back to the propellers, which then turns into thrust. And from there, the thrust, if it was allowed to get back to the engines, would instantly wreck the engines. So at one point, you need to take that thrust out of the propeller shaft and put it into the hull. And that's what the thrust bearings accomplish.
Cool. Can we check those out?
Absolutely.
So these are the thrust bearings, and they don't look like bearings that I know.
No.
Okay.
They're not. Keep in mind that what's happening is the shaft is rotating. It contains over 14,000 horsepower of rotational energy back to the propellers. The propellers turn that into thrust, which travels back up the shaft, and this is what stops that thrust and transmits it to the hull of the ship. If it didn't do that, the engine would be wrecked. What you see here are 13 saddles. Underneath those saddles are discs, just like almost like a disc brake disc. That's where the analogy stops, because those discs are permanently attached to the propeller shaft. Then these saddles are bolted to the foundation of the thrust bearing, which is bolted to the keel or the hull of the ship. And so what happens is, as the shaft tries to push past these, the saddles absorb that thrust energy and basically transmits it directly to the hull, and so all of that thrust is then converted into to thrust on the hull.
So if these go, ship stops because you've pushed your propellers all the way through the hull.
Yeah, basically. What would typically happen is if these aren't kept in perfect adjustment, one of them would overheat and it would damage the saddle and possibly damage the rotor. So these had immense amounts of not only oil but water pumped through them to lubricate them and to cool them. Surprisingly, it's not at all uncommon to put water mixed in with the oil. The oil maintains its lubrication properties, but it's cooled by the water. So these were always kept in adjustment on a regular basis so that they all apply pressure evenly.
Is that done while this ship is in motion, or do you stop?
Typically not. Now, they would certainly slowly rotate it in order to carefully adjust it and make sure that each one is applying even pressure. But frankly, there'd probably be a lot of oil spraying up through here, and I wouldn't want to open it and stick my face in there.
I wouldn't think so, but sometimes under different conditions, right?
Well, that's true. But certainly when you're in combat, the last thing you want to do is shut an engine down.
Yeah, true story.
Yeah,
I can understand that. Absolutely. Thank you so much for all of this information. I'm Trevor. This has been Tom Scott, who's been an awesome host down for us in Battleship Texas's engineering compartment. Thank you so much. We'll see you guys again next week. Remember, everybody, Battleship Texas needs your help.
Yes, come visit her or go to our website, battleshiptexas.org, battleshiptexas.org.